Some people vanish without a choice. Others make a plan and disappear on purpose. They were criminals. Their names were known, their faces were hunted, then nothing. No arrests, no remains, no final answers. We're not asking who committed the crime, but how these criminals escaped and vanished without a trace. Here's 5 criminals who escaped and never returned. Story 1. On a quiet Monday afternoon in March 1976, a respected State Department official left his office in Washington, D.C. earlier than usual. To colleagues, it seemed unremarkable, just another government worker feeling under the weather. But within days, 5 members of his family would be found dead hundreds of miles away, and the man himself would vanish without a trace. Nearly 50 years later, William Bradford Bishop, Jr. remains one of America's most elusive fugitives. William Bradford Bishop, Jr. was born on August 1, 1936, in Pasadena, California. He was highly educated, earning a degree from Yale University and multiple graduate degrees from Middlebury College and UCLA. Fluent in at least 5 languages, Bishop served in the U.S. Army counterintelligence before joining the State Department's Foreign Service. He married his high school sweetheart, Annette Weiss, and the couple had 3 sons. Bishop's career took the family across Europe and Africa before they settled in Bethesda, Maryland, where they lived with Bishop's mother, Lobelia. To neighbors and co-workers, William appeared disciplined, ambitious, and devoted to his family. From the outside, his life reflected professional success and stability. On March 1, 1976, William learned he had been passed over for a promotion he'd expected. That afternoon, he told his secretary he felt ill and left work early. Witnesses later recalled he appeared agitated. Investigators believe Bishop withdrew cash from his bank, then drove through Montgomery Mall, purchased a ball-peen hammer and gas can, and later he filled the gas can and tank of his 1974 Chevrolet station wagon at a nearby gas station. He later drove to Hardware and purchased a shovel and pitchfork. Between 7:30 to 8 p.m., William returned to his Bethesda home. What followed would only become clear days later. On March 2nd, forest rangers in North Carolina discovered 5 bodies in a shallow grave after spotting smoke from a fire. Dental records later confirmed the victims were Bishop's wife, mother, and 3 sons. Evidence suggested the bodies had been transported in William's station wagon and deliberately burned. On March 18th, William's vehicle was found abandoned at a remote campground in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. Inside were blood-stained items, weapons, and personal effects, but Bishop himself was gone. He has never been seen again. A grand jury indicted William Bishop on 5 counts of first-degree murder, and he was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Authorities believe he had nearly a week's head start before police began actively searching for him. Bishop's background raised troubling possibilities. He was an experienced outdoorsman, familiar with hiking and survival, and his diplomatic passport was never recovered. Investigators considered that he may have entered the Appalachian Trail system, blending in with hikers before disappearing. Over the years, reported sightings surfaced across Europe, including Italy, Sweden, and Switzerland. Some came from people who had known Bishop personally and claimed high confidence. None could be definitively confirmed. Other theories suggest Bishop remained in the United States under an assumed identity or died anonymously years later. The case remains open. With no surviving immediate family, the Bishop case has left a different kind of absence, one felt by investigators, former colleagues, and the public. Those who knew the family have struggled to reconcile the image of a polished diplomat with the devastation left behind. Law enforcement agencies continue to release age-progressed images, stating that Bishop could still be alive. The lack of resolution has made the case one of the longest-running fugitive mysteries tied to a family crime in American history. What if William Bradford Bishop Jr. used his intelligence training and global experience to disappear permanently in plain sight? And what if, after decades of silence, someone still recognizes the man who never returned? Story 2. On a New Jersey roadway in April 1989, what began as a routine traffic stop escalated into gunfire and a sudden disappearance. Within seconds, a state trooper's life was endangered and a passenger fled into the dark. That man would vanish so completely that decades later, authorities still debate whether he escaped justice or quietly disappeared forever. Arthur Lee Washington Jr. was born on November 30th, 1949, in New Jersey. Public records reveal little about his early family life, but his adult years were defined by repeated encounters with the criminal justice system. Washington accumulated multiple convictions for armed robbery and drug-related offenses beginning in the 1970s, establishing a long pattern of recidivism. He was also known to have associations with militant prison-based groups and the Black Liberation Army, an underground organization active during the 1970s and early 1980s that engaged in violent confrontations with law enforcement. Authorities described Washington as intelligent, guarded, and capable of operating within tight-knit networks. By the late 1980s, law enforcement viewed him as a seasoned offender with a little regard for consequences. On April 12, 1989, New Jersey State Trooper Michael J. Clayton stopped a 1979 Ford Thunderbird for an expired inspection sticker. Washington was riding in the passenger seat. As the trooper approached, Washington exited the vehicle and began walking away. When ordered to stop, Washington ignored the command. As the trooper pursued him on foot, Washington drew a semi-automatic handgun and fired multiple shots. The trooper returned fire, but during a pause to reload, Washington fled the scene. No one was physically injured, but the encounter immediately triggered a large-scale response. Police later searched Washington's apartment in Asbury Park, where additional firearms were recovered. A federal arrest warrant was issued 2 days later, charging him with attempted murder and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. From that moment forward, Arthur Lee Washington Jr. was never seen again. On October 18, 1989, Washington was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list, becoming the 427th individual to receive that designation. Authorities warned that he was armed, dangerous, and likely receiving assistance from underground contacts. His case was featured on national broadcasts, including America's Most Wanted, and a substantial reward was offered for information. Despite early tips and unconfirmed sightings during the early 1990s, no credible leads emerged after 1993. Investigators explored the possibility that Washington had fled the Mid-Atlantic region or assumed a new identity. Others believed his disappearance was not the result of escape, but decline. Washington was known to struggle with substance abuse and had reportedly tested positive for a serious illness. Law enforcement gradually came to believe he may have died while on the run, possibly without medical care. In December 2000, after more than 11 years, the FBI removed him from the 10 Most Wanted list for no longer meeting active threat criteria. No remains, documents, or confirmation have ever surfaced. Unlike many fugitive cases, Washington's disappearance left few public voices behind. What remains instead is an unresolved law enforcement file, one that represents both the danger of sudden violence and the frustration of permanent uncertainty. For investigators, the unanswered question is not only where Washington went, but how someone so closely watched simply ceased to exist. What if Arthur Lee Washington Jr. didn't escape justice, but vanished because his life quietly ended beyond view? And what if the truth disappeared with him, leaving no record of where his final steps led? Story 3. In June 1987, beneath the granite walls of one of America's most secure prisons, a convicted murderer vanished through darkness, water, and silence. What followed was not just an escape, but a decades-long mystery that crossed borders, prisons, and identities, leaving behind one haunting question: how does someone disappear not once, but repeatedly, without ever being found? Glen Stewart Godwin was born on June 26, 1958, in Miami, Florida. As a child, he moved with his family to Palm Springs, California, where he grew up and attended Palm Springs High School. By most accounts, Godwin was intelligent, articulate, and outwardly unremarkable. He played trumpet in the school band, performed well academically, and showed no obvious signs of violent behavior. After graduating in 1975, Godwin worked a series of trades, including mechanic work, tool sales, and construction. To those who knew him casually, he appeared to be building an ordinary adult life. Friends later described him as charismatic and ambitious. There was little indication that his path would soon take a catastrophic turn. In August 1980, Godwin and his roommate, Frank Soto Jr., carried out a planned robbery against an acquaintance, Kim Robert LaValle. The crime escalated into a fatal attack. LaValle was killed, and his body was later discovered in the desert after an attempt to destroy evidence. Godwin was arrested, convicted of murder and robbery, and sentenced in 1983 to 26 years to life in California State Prison. While incarcerated, Godwin demonstrated a pattern of manipulation and planning. In 1987, after an attempted escape at another facility, he was transferred to Folsom State Prison, a maximum security institution. Just 5 months later, on June 5, 1987, Godwin executed one of the most infamous prison escapes in California history. Using smuggled tools, he cut through barriers, dropped into a storm drain beneath the prison, and crawled hundreds of feet through darkness. He emerged near the American River, where a raft, left by an accomplice, allowed him to float to freedom. Godwin vanished into the wilderness and then beyond U.S. borders. Authorities quickly uncovered evidence that Godwin had help. His wife at the time and a former cellmate were both implicated in planning the escape. Within months, Godwin resurfaced in Mexico, where he became involved in drug trafficking. He was arrested, convicted, and imprisoned again, this time in a Mexican facility. But history repeated itself. While extradition to the United States was being arranged, Godwin was accused of killing another inmate inside the prison. The new allegation delayed his transfer, giving him the opportunity to escape once more in September 1991. After that second escape, Godwin disappeared completely. He was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in 1996. Investigators believed he remained in Latin America, possibly using aliases and blending into criminal networks. Despite reported sightings and international attention, no verified location was ever confirmed. In 2016, after nearly 3 decades without results, the FBI removed Godwin from the list, citing diminishing returns from publicity. His case remains open. Unlike many fugitives, Godwin left behind few public voices searching for answers. Instead, his case stands as a symbol of institutional failure and lingering uncertainty. For investigators, his repeated escapes represent a rare convergence of planning, opportunity, and luck, one that continues to frustrate efforts to close the case. What if Glen Godwin is still alive, quietly existing under a name no one recognizes? And what if the truth of his final escape is known only to those who helped him disappear? Story 4. In the mid-1980s, as federal prosecutors prepared to bring one of the largest domestic terrorism cases in U.S. history to trial, a key defendant quietly vanished. She did not flee during a raid or disappear across a border under pursuit. Instead, she walked out on bail and was never seen again. Nearly 4 decades later, Elizabeth Ann Duke remains one of America's longest-running political fugitives. Elizabeth Ann Duke was born on November 25, 1940, in Beeville, Texas, though she is also given an alternate birth date of April 20, 1941. Little is publicly known about her early family life, but records show she was well educated and worked as a teacher and teaching assistant in Texas during the late 1960s and early 1970s. During this period, Duke became involved in campus activism and anti-Vietnam War protests. Court records document her repeated legal challenges against university administrations and state authorities, centered on free speech and protest restrictions. Over time, her political views grew more radical, shifting away from public demonstrations toward underground organizing. By the late 1970s, federal authorities believed Duke became associated with the May 19th Communist Organization, a clandestine group formed from splinter factions of earlier radical movements. The organization rejected electoral politics and openly advocated revolutionary action against the U.S. government. On May 23, 1985, Duke was arrested in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, alongside physician and activist Alan Berkman. Authorities discovered loaded firearms in their vehicle and later uncovered a large cache of explosives, detonating cord, and weapons stored in a garage leased under Duke's name. She was indicted on federal charges, including conspiracy, unlawful possession of firearms and explosives, and falsification of identification documents. Despite the seriousness of the charges, Duke was released on bail in July 1985. In October of that year, she failed to appear for a required court hearing. A bench warrant was issued immediately. Elizabeth Ann Duke had disappeared. Unlike many fugitives, she left behind no confirmed trail, no financial activity, no verified sightings, and no public communication. Federal investigators allege Duke played a logistical role in the May 19th Communist Organization, which claimed responsibility for multiple bombings of U.S. government and military buildings between 1983 and 1985. These included the 1983 bombing of the U.S. Capitol, carried out at night after a warning call, causing extensive damage but no casualties. Duke was named in the broader resistance conspiracy case alongside several co-defendants, many of whom were eventually convicted and served lengthy prison sentences. Duke alone avoided trial by fleeing before proceedings advanced. Authorities believe she may have relied on underground networks established during years of radical organizing. She is known to speak fluent Spanish, and investigators have long considered the possibility that she crossed into Canada or relocated to Latin America. However, no theory has been conclusively proven. Unlike many fugitive cases, little is publicly known about Duke's family response. Her absence has left questions not only for investigators, but also for the historical record. As co-defendants aged, served sentences, and re-entered society, Duke's case remained frozen in time, an unresolved chapter of a turbulent era in American history. What if Elizabeth Ann Duke quietly built a new life, hidden in plain sight for decades? And what if crucial answers about that era disappeared along with her? Story 5. On a quiet September night in 1983, an armored car depot in West Hartford, Connecticut, closed as it always had. Inside, millions of dollars sat secured behind steel doors. By morning, the money was gone. And so was the man trusted to protect it. More than 40 years later, Victor Manuel Gerena remains missing, along with one of the largest cash hauls in American history. Victor Manuel Gerena was born on June 24, 1958. By his mid-20s, he was working as an armored car guard for Wells Fargo, a job that required trust, reliability, and daily access to large sums of money. To co-workers, Gerena appeared dependable and unremarkable. He was engaged to be married and had children. Few suspected that outside of work, he had become involved with the Boricua Popular Army, also known as Los Macheteros, a militant organization advocating for Puerto Rican independence. This connection would ultimately place Gerena at the center of a meticulously planned operation that blurred the line between political action and organized crime. On September 12, 1983, Gerena arrived at work as usual. He requested permission to park a borrowed vehicle inside the armored car facility, a request that was granted. As the evening progressed and operations wound down, Gerena was alone inside the depot with two co-workers and more than $7 million in cash. At that point, authorities say he disarmed, restrained, and bound both men. He attempted to incapacitate them using a syringe containing a mixture later identified as aspirin and water, an action that proved ineffective but caused fear and confusion. Over the next 90 minutes, Gerena methodically loaded the money, bag by bag, into the vehicle. He then exited the facility, leaving his co-workers physically unharmed but tied up. By the time authorities were notified, Gerena was gone. The next day, the vehicle was found abandoned several miles away. The money had vanished. The robbery immediately became the largest cash theft in U.S. history at that time. Initial speculation painted Gerena as a lone actor, but investigators soon uncovered links to Los Macheteros, who later claimed responsibility for the operation. Authorities believe the robbery was planned months in advance and that Gerena received assistance after leaving the depot. Evidence suggests he was transported out of the continental United States, possibly through Mexico and eventually to Cuba. While multiple members of Los Macheteros were arrested and convicted in the years that followed, the stolen money was never recovered. Gerena was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in 1984 and remained there for more than 3 decades, longer than any fugitive before him. In 2016, he was removed from the list, not because he was found, but because investigators believed continued publicity no longer increased the chances of capture. The FBI still considers him wanted and believes he may be living in Cuba. Gerena's disappearance left lasting consequences for those connected to the case. His co-workers carried the trauma of the robbery, and the entire investigation spanned generations of agents. For families of those convicted, closure eventually came through trials and sentences. For Gerena's case, there has been no such ending, only unanswered questions and a missing fortune that reshaped federal security practices nationwide. What if Victor Gerena never truly vanished, but simply crossed beyond reach? And what if the stolen millions were never meant to be found? Years passed, records gathered dust, and justice remained unfinished. These stories are not only about escape, but about the silence left behind. Until answers surface, the questions endure, waiting to be remembered. This is Vanished Stories, where the missing are never forgotten.